Welcome to Recombination Nation. Today, I have a very special guest, Todd Elliott, wrote a book called The Cunning Farmer. He also writes a Substack of the same name, and he's a very rare individual who has delved into the history of agricultural spiritual traditions. That's what the book is all about. I would highly recommend that you check it out if you want to get a sense of this very important, pervasive aspect of culture that was all through our civilizations for the last few thousand years and has been kind of forgotten. There's more, maybe you'd say, showy forms of traditional magic that have resonated in the cultural imagination today, and we've lost touch with that much more everyday uh, foundation to our civilization. So that's my very quick introduction. Todd, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up on this journey in life?
Well, Shane, thank you for, let me say first, thank you for having me on the show. It's really great to be here. It's great to get to talk to you. And to answer your question, I have been an organic farmer for 30 years. Uh, I started in, I started in 1996 because I moved out to the country in Kentucky with a girlfriend at the time, and we had no jobs, and the only jobs were working with farmers. I worked with farmers first in tobacco, but also in organic vegetables, and sort of picked up the trade of driving the tractor and working land and raising plants and growing a garden. And from the farmers that I worked with and apprenticed with, a lot of the stuff we just learned by through hands-on experience. We cleared a couple homesteads out of places where there hadn't been homesteads before. So we cut down some trees and put in a garden and hauled lots of compost and built little greenhouses to start plants in, and just basically got our hands in there while a lot of people my age were going to university. I was learning the university of life. So
Yep.
and I didn't really ever look back. I've been doing that ever since 1996 when I first moved to Kentucky.
How
I'm
far
originally from
how far back do your spiritual intuitions and interests go? Like, do you have any like origin stories where your eyes were suddenly open to the world?
Well, basically in my late teens, I got interested in esotericism and magic and things like that, and found a crowd of people that were interested in that, and just started diving in. I've always been interested in also in religion and philosophy and symbolism and like Jungian psychology, and it's just always been a deep and passionate interest of mine. Um, Yeah, I've had some eye-opening experiences I talk about in the book, revelations that throughout my on my path that have been helpful to me and inspirational. Yeah, it's been a journey, and then farming is kind of, as you know, is kind of all encompassing, and it tends to take over. So for a while, I got pretty down to earth with the farming, and then as I got older, I decided to dive back into the spirituality, and not that I ever really lost it, but as a more serious interest again, and the book sort of comes out of that. The book actually I have had in the back of my mind ever since I was in my early 20s. I'm 53 now, so
Mhm.
um, the book has always been something I've wanted to do.
Interesting. I'm very glad that you wrote it. Just a angle I'm curious about the broader kind of spiritual and esoteric community. How did they react to you taking this interest in agricultural magic systems from the past?
Well, I feel like I've been I'm really happy to say that I've been well received, and that people seem to really like it and enjoy the novelty of having like a farmer magician. I think I think it's a natural combination. I think like I said, it's been the response has been overwhelmingly positive, and I've all the people that I've met, mostly online. I live in a pretty isolated place. I haven't really met any. I don't really know that many esoteric practitioners personally. I know a handful, but people from all over the world have responded to the Cunning Farmer and to the ideas that I'm putting up forward in the book and in my blog, and it's just been really amazing. I think it's a natural fit because all of our esoteric systems have evolved in uh, agricultural societies hand in hand with agriculture. In fact, if you read some of the historical texts on magic from the Middle Ages and from ancient times, a lot of the concerns are, making crops thrive and manipulating the weather and things like that. So some of the classic grimoires will have spells to make rainfall or to aid your crops or something like that. The some of the one of the classic grimoires of agricultural magic is the Picatrix, and there's so many spells in there or astrological talismans for various things that would be important to a farmer, like controlling insects and animal pests and things like that. So it's always been a part of the esoteric traditions. So it's very natural to blend them together again.
Mm. Now, on a more practical note, what plant species do you work most closely with? And are you doing any breeding and selection? Because that's one of my things I find most fascinating.
Well, I raise vegetables for a living, and I am ashamed to say I grow a lot of hybrids because for my commercial crops because
Yeah.
um, I have to have predictable crops. But I do raise and save my own seed of garlic. I've been growing the same garlic,
Ah.
which is music, for 20 years and refining it and selecting it and roguing out off types and things like that. So now we have a pretty good strain of garlic. I also raise open pollinated corn, which I make cornmeal out of, and that's Reed's Yellow Dent, and I've been growing that for I grew it at the last farm I lived on, so probably about 20 years or more, and saving the seed. I've grown a couple other varieties of corn or maize, I don't know what you guys call it down.
Yeah, either's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. I've grown some old-fashioned white seeded maize that had little short squat ears and 14 foot tall stalks that was a Kentucky heirloom. I found that the animals liked that one a little too much and I couldn't really grow it anymore. I had to grow something that was a little harder, a little, not quite as attractive to the animals. So I settled on a variety called Reed's Yellow Dent, and I just love it. I love to raise maize. I think it's a really beautiful crop to grow. I think I love how it has such a presence, um, to plant some seeds in an open field and then 2 months later to have basically a forest of corn stalks there is just so magical to me. And I like to go out into the cornfield and just hang out there at night on a moonlit night and just listen to the corn grow and listen to the frogs and the wind in the corn in the stalks and the leaves. It's just really a beautiful experience. It's one of my top favorite sacred sites is to hang out in the cornfield at night.
Mm. Um,
Um,
does
what else
some are some plant species easier to come into harmony with than others? Do some like seem to not want to have anything to do with humans?
yeah, it seems like some are a little harder to work with. Uh, a couple other plants that I experiment with. I told you I mentioned a little while ago that I got my start working with tobacco farmers, and I don't smoke anymore. I don't consume tobacco in any form, but I love to raise tobacco because it's another plant with a lot of presence, and it seems so. I raise a couple different varieties. I raise Nicotiana tabacum, two varieties of that. One's just our local. I think it's just the yellow burley that people raise around here. And then also I raised one called West Indies, and they're almost like a vegetable in how easy they are to take care of, and how readily they respond to, like, you know just being tended and cared for. But there's a variety that the native people in North America used to raise called rustica tobacco, and it's a smaller, more wild kind of tobacco, and it's a little more finicky with the care that it likes. Like if you start the seeds too early, it'll bolt. So you have to start them a little bit later so it doesn't immediately run to seed. You won't get the big leaves. You'll just get flowers. So that's maybe an example of what you're talking about. I raise small grains kind of for fun as well. Wheat and barley and oats I've raised. I have a little bitty not little bitty, but it's a pretty good sized machine. But I have a antique combine harvester. I haven't dusted it off in a few years, but I like to raise winter wheat and spring barley and spring oats and things like that. Uh, I have a grist mill, so which I use to grind the wheat and the corn into meal and flour. So that's something I do for fun.
I have a question here that I really want to ask is, do you think there's a link between the energy of particular staple crops, like take the big ones like wheat, rice, and maize, that influences the societies that build and grow around them?
Yeah, I sort of do. Like I I think the interesting thing about maize is it's the staple crop of the Americas, right? And almost a, a lot of the rituals that have cropped up around maize in Central America and North America are kind of like there's a lot of like blood rituals with maize.
Mm,
You know what I mean? And with whereas in Northern Europe, in Western Europe, there's like wheat and barley were the big things. And I think so the corn mother, the corn goddess, the maize goddess is like a huge thing in North America, South America, all over the world, and in Europe. But it seems like she maybe has like a I don't want to say I don't want to generalize, but there's almost a like maybe a darker face, a more primal face to the North American version than there is to like say the Roman series or something like that.
hmm
You know what I mean?
She's a hungrier spirit.
A hungrier spirit, yeah. And I noticed that we have a lot more trouble with wild animals in the maze than we do in the so there's a lot more like pest control that goes along with like almost the plant almost requires you to do some killing to get a crop. You know what I mean?
hmm
Whereas whereas the small grains things tend to leave them alone.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have a theory that this is more like a biological theory that maize is the only fully domesticated plant that we grow. Like it's transformed so much compared to the original form. It's just unrecognizable. Whereas wheat and rice, I think, kind of keep one foot in the door of being a little bit wild. Like they've got some capacity to look after themselves if they really have to.
Yeah, because the seed heads will shatter and they'll self-sow, whereas a corn plant they stay on the cob and don't shatter. The teosinte does shatter. I've never raised teosinte before, but it'd be interesting to see what it looks like.
I've got
But
a little
yeah,
patch of it here, and it's very much a grass. It behaves and feels very much like a grass, whereas corn only has eyes for humans. It's very aware of the humans around it. Is the way I'm reading it.
from what I understand too, where I live in North America, it came late
Mm,
to North America, and maybe I don't want to say because I think the archaeologists are not of a like mind about when it got to North America. Specifically, say the Ohio Valley, Ohio River Valley, where I live, but sometime between say 500 AD and 1200 AD, it came to North America, and it absolutely transformed the societies where it lived from being small scale hunter-gatherer village, societies to being almost urban societies on the Central American model, which is really interesting. You have societies like Cahokia and in Illinois, which was the largest city in North America, and it was almost entirely made possible by the farming of maize.
hmm
Um, so that's another thing that, well, of course, all the grains allowed for urbanization. Um, but the maize is
That is
just
a
so much
story.
higher.
If you're going to write another book, I would love to see someone put together all of the little fragments that are left of that transition when societies went from hunter-gatherer to like maize-based agriculture. I know there's little bits of it, like a buffalo bird woman, I think, has in her account a memory that was passed down to her of when the maize and the beans first arrived in Dakota, I think it was.
Yeah, I think you're right. Or yeah, I think you're right. She was a Hidatsa. That's a great book.
Mm. Very rare to get those kind of accounts. Like they just everyone's too busy writing about wars, and they should be writing about farming.
Yeah, I think she wrote in the late 19th century or something like that.
Yeah,
She,
yeah.
I mean, I think it was transcribed, but yeah, she was interviewed. That is a really good book.
Mm, mm. Now, what about
Yeah,
invasive species? Do you have any particular perspective on them?
so I was thinking about this recently. Our land here is pretty damaged from agriculture. Um, and from sheep, I think sheep grazing, cattle grazing, arable farming. The people that the European settlers that moved here farmed in a completely different way than the native people who lived here before them. Who the native people, I believe, practiced swidden agriculture on the river bottoms and maybe somewhat on the uplands, but mostly on the river bottoms, which are a lot more level soil. And the swidden, the shifting cultivation or the swidden cultivation doesn't lend itself to erosion because you will crop a place a few years and then you'll abandon it for 15 to 20 years and then come back. And but the when the European settlers moved here in the late 18th century, they started clearing large tracts of farmland first on the river bottoms, but now we also have very fertile soils on the uplands around here, but they're also highly erodible. So as the farming economy kind of tanked in the mid 20th century, a lot of farmland came to be abandoned, and a lot of our woods here actually used to be pastures and even cropland. So the soil is really damaged, and it is the kind of environment that invasive species thrive in. And I think one of our biggest invasive plant species is the bush honeysuckle, for instance.
Mhm.
And it's all over our land. And Shane, I'm not, a lot of people are really concerned with eliminating things like that. And I really don't go out of my way to kill it. If I'm trying to plant some woodland medicinal herbs and it's in my way, I will not hesitate to cut down a plant of that, but I don't go trying to eliminate it from my land because I feel like the land is so damaged here that anything that can come in and make biomass is probably more helpful than it is harmful. The topsoil is washed away on a lot of the places where this stuff grows, and it is just it's making lignin, it's making leaves, it's making edible berries for the birds, and so I don't really personally get too upset about invasive species on my land. I wrote recently. I wrote a Substack about a practice in from the British Isles where, and perhaps from other places in Northern Europe where they would have the what they called the Goodman's Croft or the Devil's Half Acre or something like that, where they would abandon a piece of land. They wouldn't cultivate it, they wouldn't harvest anything from it, and it was almost a place that was left wild for the spirits.
Mhm.
And a lot of my farm falls under that category. So, and that's where all the honeysuckle and all the ailanthus trees and all the are on a part of the land that I don't really do much with agriculturally. So, I feel like the nature spirits are at work there, and right now they're using those plants to do their thing, and I I think that I'm just happy to let them go their way.
Mm, mm. Yeah, yeah. No, I love that. I love that response. Now
Yeah, I
oh, sorry, you go.
species I think I personally, and now I'm going to get probably controversial, but I think it's kind of a thing to sell herbicides, really.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
And
I interviewed Fred Pierce, the New Wild, and he looked into the invasive control industry, and yeah, it's a very eye-opening perspective on something that most people just take at face value, that there's these evil species that need to be wiped off the earth, and we're doing it. We're not really. Um,
yeah,
linking back to Buffalo Bird Woman, one thing I found really interesting was. Uh, she noted the time when all of the old world weeds got introduced into her part of the world and made farming much more difficult. So
Oh, sure.
it made me wonder if there was a golden age of early agriculture in the Middle East before all of the weeds evolved to fill in the gaps in the new system.
I imagine there probably was. Yeah, it probably didn't take long though. But people traveled once people started traveling across the continent too. You're bringing all kinds of things. Well, even the earthworm,
Yep. Yeah.
not native to North America. The Europeans even brought the earthworms, and from what I understand, they totally transformed the woodlands to being having deep leaf mulch to having almost a bare surface.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's amazing the kind of changes that can happen there. Oh,
So some
yeah.
people are getting rid of earthworms. I mean, it's just weird.
Well, I believe they were there before the glaciation, which wiped them out. And then when the glaciers retreated, there was this brief period of however many tens of thousands of years where life evolved without earthworms. Like, that's just such an amazing story.
It's fascinating.
Mm. Now, do you know much about the selective breeding of medicinal or entheogenic plants in history? It's another topic I find really fascinating.
I saw that on your list of questions, and I was trying to think of. So you mentioned Salvia divinorum, and that is one interesting case. And another case is the Brugmansia.
Mhm.
Um, you have those in Australia. I know they're from South America, but people grow them all over as as a ornamental.
Yeah, they've got very deep origins. They were hybridized somewhere way back in the mists of time, and nobody really knows how and where they came into being.
And some don't make seeds in the wild, and they have to be hand pollinated and things like that. And yeah, it's fascinating. And they in South America they have little pockets of them for different uses. I only grow one variety of them. I tried to grow two. And one of the varieties I tried to grow is the Brugmansia sanguinea, which is used well, from what I understand, used for commercial scopolamine production. But it doesn't do very well here. I started some seeds last year, and every one of them came up, and they're really vigorous little seedlings. But I've never gotten one to bloom here because the climate is all wrong for them.
Yeah.
It's too hot, and then it's too cold.
Yep.
But I have Brugmansia suavolens, which is and I only have one cultivar, many clones of it, but yeah, from what I understand, it was something that like Salvia divinorum that was cultivated as entheogen, and eventually some of the varieties lost the ability to even reproduce from seeds, although people do cross pollinate them nowadays for breeding purposes.
Mm.
But I don't know about entheogenic use. No, that's a really interesting area of research. Um, I know people. We mentioned cannabis before we turned on recording, and that people are breeding for higher and higher levels of THC, which I indicated that I didn't think was the best idea that there ever was. Um, but
It's a very one-dimensional transformation.
yeah, 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 and I think it has unintended consequences of making something that was once pretty safe and harmless into something maybe that's a little more edgy and harmful than it used to be.
No, it's like the difference between a morphine tea or tincture versus refined heroin.
Exactly, exactly. Like where's the plant in its natural, the older style that maybe had 3 to 5% THC, and then the newer styles that have up to 25%. I don't personally enjoy those very much.
Do you think that there's untapped opportunity for breeding other medicinal and maybe entheogenic plants as well? There's a long list of species that haven't been modified very much by human attention.
I'm sure there is. I have heard of St. John's wort that had higher levels of hypericin that people were working on. I'm trying to remember. It's outside of my. I mean, I do work and cultivate medicinal plants, but a lot of the really strong medicinal ones um, are plenty strong.
I also want to get your perspective on the spiritual significance of transforming a wild plant into a domesticated one, because that's something I'm trying to do here with what's left of my lifetime, with a very ancient plant, the bunya nuts, these dinosaur era kind of trees,
Oh,
and
wow.
like compared to corn, which is very seems to be very tuned into human presence, the bunyas I think have taken them like many years of me being around them to even notice that I'm there. So I'm just curious if you have any perspective on like what is involved there. Is it like a marriage? Is it like proposing and then waiting for a yes?
I don't, that's a really interesting question. Do you feel like you work with them consciously, like try to contact them on the spiritual level in sort of a trance or meditative situation?
If it's happening, it's very intuitive. I'm not adopting any specific practices. I think it's just repeated exposure and paying attention to them in a very open-minded way is the way I'm approaching it.
I mean, I've heard people, was it Michael Pollan that wrote I don't remember what the book was called, about about plants trying to please people, like
Mm,
domestic plants trying to please people and evolving to be more of what the plant breeders want them to be in sort of a non Darwinian way.
mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you're not just doing selection. The selection is going even faster because the plants, it's like coevolution.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've seen that just recently. I've got some hybrid sword beans. I took two of the species and hand crossed them, and I'm only in the second generation, and already they're pretty much exactly what I was imagining, wanting. Like I haven't applied any selection to them, and I'm like, they look like they're done, and I'm
Oh,
scratching my head trying to figure out how they managed to do that so fast.
that's amazing. I mean, supposedly Luther Burbank was very adept at making plants sort of not making, but getting plants to do what he wanted. And that's what was one of his great successes as a plant breeder.
Hmm.
And I think that there's probably more at work there on a quote unquote spiritual level than simply selecting the genes for the desired characteristic. I mean, I do think the plant is trying to meet you where you are and ask you. That's not impossible for me to imagine at all. That's not outside of my reality paradigm at all. It's completely within it. I think plants respond to us in and give us what we want them. You know what I mean? And that could be a clue to this medicine that its effectiveness too is my close relationship to this plant um, as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I would look at an example in nature of like the orchids that produce flowers that like perfectly imitate wasps and bees to like trick
Yeah.
them into mating with them. Like it's very difficult to explain that just through random mutations. There has to be some, well, there might be some kind of deeper resonance between those species, like tapping into each other.
I mean, it's like how fast did it happen too?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
the the thing, I think evolution's a perfectly good theory, but sometimes it goes a little faster than you would expect,
yeah, yeah.
especially with
Yeah,
your
there's a deep suspicion that there's some other mechanism there than just the simple kind of textbook models.
absolutely, absolutely, and I think plants um, really do want, particularly some plants really do want to make us happy. I think there's some that would rather be left the hell alone. They usually evolve spines and things like that to
Yeah.
keep us away from them.
Mm.
You were mentioning some plants that didn't want us to, that might not want us around, and I definitely think that they show it in their physiology a lot of times.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is a relevant extension from that idea. Like, I'm not following any specific tradition in my approach to things, but are there pros and cons to like adopting an established tradition versus intuiting a new one on your own?
I think I do a little bit of both. So I'm not a pure adopter of any tradition. I just kind of go with what works, and even that changes over time. So Um, I'm not a I think I'm not a reconstructionist of any ancient paganism or whatever. I think you have to make your practice suit your personality and your reality and your place. I mean, if you're doing the kind of things we're doing, if you're working with the land has a say too,
Yeah.
and perhaps maybe the greatest say,
Well,
you know.
do you have any advice for if you are tapping into one tradition to transplanting it to another location? Do you think there's like you were saying, the energy, the spirit of the local region that you're in has a big impact in that. So, like, have you had any personal experience of some practices or approaches translating better than others? And like, how do you evaluate that as you go?
So, here's one example I often talk about, like as far as making offerings to say land spirits or deities or things like that. In North America, the indigenous people would often offer like cornmeal, like ground maize or tobacco. And I feel like, and then in like ancient Greece, it was red wine. It was wine. You pour out wine libations and olive oil libations and things like that, or leave out some milk and butter for the little people in Ireland and places like that. And I feel like that is a those are all fine practices, and I have done all of them. But what I return to again and again is what people were doing here before the Europeans showed up. So even if I might be working with a European spirit, a deity or something like that, I will still offer the American crops to them. You
Mm,
know what I mean?
mm,
Because I feel like something that I have produced with my own hands is more valuable as a spirit offering than something I have bought at the liquor store.
mm.
You know what I mean? I was interviewed on the Radical Elfhame podcast, and the gentleman that runs that podcast is a winemaker, and he makes wine, he grows wine, grows grapes, he makes wine, and he uses it for a spiritual offering. That is checks every box. And but I don't do that, so I have to buy it. And so I don't really. I used to do that and buy wine and beer to make spirit offerings, and now I have dispensed with that because since I can't make it, well, I probably can make it, but I don't drink anymore, so that's less fun to make it if you don't drink. Um, yeah,
Well, this is maybe a too open-ended, too deep, too ambitious question, but do you have any intuitions about where magical traditions like originally come from? Like they kind of get passed and modified and but like if you keep tracing back, like I'm thinking even to like human origins, like do you have any sense about where this impulse, where this behavior kind of originally comes from?
yeah. I mean, I think it comes down to basically shamanism, for lack of a better word. I know that's a problematic term, um, and it relates to a specific culture in Siberia. But in anthropology, shamanism's been applied mistakenly or no as a sort of approach to the spirit world that's been used worldwide, that's been applied to cultures worldwide by anthropologists. And I think there's enough commonality that when you say shamanism, people know what you're talking about. There's a certain like you're talking about spirit travel, you're talking about trance, you're talking about perhaps spirit possession, you're talking about dance, you're talking about costumes and drumming, and I think that's the origins of magic.
Hmm.
Honestly, I think it's a probably not even a controversial thing to say that because in all of our accounts that we read of shamans in traditional societies, the one of the things they do is what we would call magic,
Yeah.
uh, shape shifting, energy healing, even baneful magic, blessings, um, all that, all the things using occult. energies to cause change in the world. So I think, yeah, I think that's the origins of magic. And I think to some extent our Western magical traditions are an approach, an animist and shamanic approach that is available to Western people.
I was about to suggest that Luther Burbank could have been a shaman. Like the archetype is that there's a small percentage of people who just have a unusual tendency and attraction to these kind of practices. And Luther Burbank, I think, would be a perfect example because he just started breeding plants kind of in a way that doesn't seem connected to anything in his environment, in his history.
Well, he certainly had a talent for plants too. I mean, people talk about having a green thumb or something like that, and it's not necessarily the same thing as shamanism, but it is a part of shamanism for some people. I mean, there's shamans that live in deserts and shamans that live in you know Greenland and places like that where there's not very many plants. So the approach is more of an openness to the spirit world. But Luther Burbank certainly had and I would say that green shamanism or plant shaman, botanical shamanism is definitely one of the subsets of shamanism. And Luther Burbank could have been partaking of that territory unconsciously, perhaps.
Mm, mm. Um, I'm also curious, like, a lot of traditional magic is informed by observance of celestial bodies. And I
Mhm.
wonder if all of the new discoveries in science, not just in space, but maybe on other levels as well, open up new possibilities for new kinds of spiritual traditions.
Yeah, I've heard people say that some people are, we didn't know where the center of the Milky Way galaxy is, but now some astrologers are factoring in the galactic center, which is, I believe, at like 24 degrees of Sagittarius or
Yeah,
25 degrees of Sagittarius or something like that.
yeah.
So that's interesting. So people are saying that, when things aspect the galactic center, that it has an effect. So yeah, I think that, and I think astrology is always evolving.
Mm,
It's always evolving. I tend to stick to the older versions of it because they've been more tried and true. But I really think it is an experimental science of a sort, and
mm.
I think some people are doing really great work with some of the newer things out there, like the
It's
Galactic.
funny you mentioned that. I interviewed Julian Goff, who is working on the idea that black holes create new universes inside them. And in my
Mhm.
novel, set way in the future, the culture worships black holes. They believe that when you die, your soul basically travels to the nearest black hole and gets reborn in the next universe.
That sounds reasonable in a way. I
Yeah,
think black hole. I mean, if you follow Rupert Sheldrake, and who says that the sun is almost certainly conscious, right?
yeah.
I mean, if and the Earth is conscious, then wouldn't a massive black hole have to be conscious? And maybe some sort of like Lovecraftian entity, like a world-devouring, like monster of cosmic proportions, and not necessarily evil because it's just doing what it does, but certainly some sort of consciousness on something that large and that ancient.
It definitely sparks the imagination.
It does, and I've thought that before. I mean, if Jupiter is a spiritual entity, then the supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy certainly is one too.
Yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
and intelligence and consciousness being non-local. I mean, you certainly should be able to communicate with something like that.
Interesting, interesting.
I mean, we astrologers believe, I mean, astrological magicians try to communicate with stellar intelligences all the time.
Mm.
That's what making a talisman is. That's what doing a petition is. We wait and we pick a moment when that star is more easily contacted. and and that's when we do our election. That's when we send out a petition and make a talisman. So you could certainly imagine do that with a black hole if you knew where it was.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. Very interesting. Now, a lot of spiritual traditions focus on the deep past and ancestors and all that kind of stuff. And I wonder if there's any complement to that of ones that look into the deep future.
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, obviously, there are some traditions that run out the cosmic cycles
Yeah,
for
there's
a
like
long.
prophecies of like the end of time are kind of a
Yeah,
common thing.
and then some religions like Jainism or whatever have like the cyclical nature of the cosmos really plotted out to really large units of, or the Mayans to really large units of time. Um, I forget what it was. Like I went to I went to the ruined city of Koba in the Yucatan Peninsula, and this isn't the past, but this is it was the deep time. This isn't the future, but it's the deep time past. And in Koba, on a stela in Koba, is the largest number, the oldest date ever calculated by any human anywhere, I believe. And I mean, and they did this without computers, and it was, God, I can't. I'm not even gonna. I wrote a Substack about it a while ago. It was like a ridiculously large number. It was some hundreds of times older than the age of the universe, and it was this number that was put on a stela commemorating the victories of a particular Mayan queen. So what the
What?
priests figuring that number out were trying to communicate with that is beyond me, but they were doing some pretty abstract reasoning and some deep mathematics doing that. And it almost seems like you could do the future, the Mayan calendar, you can calculate the future just as easily.
Yeah, yeah. I almost wonder too about like a more mundane, homely version of that, like the Japanese tradition of having like ancestor shrines, but for the future, like it's kind of like a response to the demographic collapse that we need to invest imaginative energy into what the next generations in our families are going to be, or they may not come into existence.
That's a good idea. Yeah, that's an amazing idea.
Just a
But
thought.
yeah, as in to like try to imagine that reality so it comes to pass.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. A kind of a familial hyperstition, I think you'd call it.
Well, have you? I mean, this is again really speculative and way outside of my usual wheelhouse, but there are some folks who believe that what people call, extraterrestrials are actually people from the future.
Hmm.
Like, like isn't the Fermi paradox like there's got to be intelligent life in the universe, but it might be so spaced so far apart that we might never come in contact with. So it's potential that what we are coming in contact with is us. Because if you believe that time travel is possible, right? If time travel is possible, then basically somebody's already done it.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah. So where are they coming from? Yeah.
all time is one, and somebody's already they're probably already here. They would have to be if it's possible.
Well, a related question I wanted to ask you too. What you interpret as nature spirits in your part of the world, I think you have some suspicion that they might be traces of humans that have lived there previously. And I wondered if you have any sense that you might end up kind of haunting the part of the land that you've tended during your life.
I think that there's the ancient a lot of ancient cultures believe that there were more than one part of the soul, right?
Yeah.
Perhaps one of those parts stays behind in the land. The other thing that always occurs to me about like personal eschatology, like the destiny of the soul or whatever, is that when one transcends one's bodily existence, that one passes into a timeless state, steps outside of the stream of time, as it were, and onto the shore. And I think that once you're on the shore, you can go back or forward walking along the shore. Like time passes differently on the shore than it does in the river.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you can easily go backwards. So I don't think a person has to be like I've given this some thought when it comes to like communicating with spirits from the other side or things like this. Like is that incompatible with versions of the afterlife that say have um heaven or whatnot? Um an eternal I think once you're in that state, you can probably step back into the land, or you can still watch over it as a guardian because you're freed from being tied to one time by the body,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? But I do think that some people, and I don't know if this would happen to me or not, but I do believe that some people love their land and love their place so much that they do stay behind as a guardian. And I think that's the reason a lot of ancestral cultures built mounds and put their rulers in the mounds was so that the rulers could act as a guardian of the land and watch over it. And I think to some extent, um, I would be happy to do that as long as my land didn't go in a bad way. Can you imagine being stuck in a build a shopping mall on top of it or something like that? How like you'd be filled with rage. I always think about that when like where I live, the indigenous people built mounds all over, and they're almost all gone now. They've been torn down,
Yeah.
and some of the ones that are left are in the middle of a shopping center, for instance. There's one city in Kentucky, not too far from here, that has some Adena culture mounds that are just surrounded by a strip mall and things like that. And I
That feels
would
like
kind of wonder
really
about.
bad juju. Like I'd
Oh,
imagine going to those places to like buy an iced coffee would have an extra level of weirdness on top of it.
oh, exactly. And I went to one of these places in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, and it was this mound called the Shrum Mound, and it's about a 2,500-year-old mound. And there was a dozen people buried in it. I think that some of the skeletons I hope they're still there. But it was surrounded by, on one side, an interstate highway, on another side, a subdivision, and on another side, a quarry, like a flooded quarry. And
Oh, yep.
I felt so sad for the dwellers, for the spirits of the people that were there, who were almost certainly there to put there to watch over their descendants.
Well, aren't ethereal beings like the Fae, the fairies, reputed to be averse to iron? And I've wondered if anyone's considered whether modern phenomena like electricity and radio and computers might have similar effects. And maybe having the opportunity to spend time away from civilization gives you a perspective on that.
Whether the Fae are, I can't imagine that they would enjoy any of that stuff. Yeah, I mean, I think about we have a train that run like a freight train, major freight line that runs through the valley below me, and I always think about whenever I hear it, like I remember hearing somewhere that the freight train scared away the ferries from someplace when they put it through in Europe, and I always think that when I'm sitting outside at night and I hear the freight train blow, I hope they've gotten used to it.
Well,
I,
the possibility, like I don't know if you're on the same page as me, that I have the perspective that industrial civilization is probably going to run out of resources and momentum and just, rust into the dirt eventually. And it opens the possibility for a re-enchantment of the world if all of that uh, energy was driven out by the material technology, that it might actually come back again in the distant future.
you mean the re-enchantment? Yeah, I think about what you're talking, the scenario they were talking about, the industrial civilization. I've been thinking about that for years. I'm sort of a prepper myself, and I feel like that would be a pretty painful transition. And on one level, I sort of hope that we come up with a way to phase it out gradually, but I don't think we will. But I feel like the future is an open-ended thing, and that no particular outcome is certain because everything is so I can't see it. even as an astrologer, I can see cosmic cycles and I can see things like that, but I can't see whether, the petroleum's all going to run out in the next couple of years and we're all going to be forced back to a more traditional way of living or not.
That might be why we're both fans of John Michael Greer with his vision that it's going to be a long, steady, drawn out process with the occasional, bit of fireworks where something breaks and doesn't get repaired. But most of the journey is going to be just a steady decline back into, what for most of history would be called ordinary poverty.
Right. It looks more likely this year than any other time I've ever seen in my life.
Mm.
I mean, I see the rising petroleum prices and this stuff that's going on in the Middle East, as almost like a desperate grabbing after resources that are becoming more and more scarce.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I certainly look at my own petroleum use very differently than I did a couple years ago with all this that's going on. I tend to think, um, you know, it seems very wasteful to be mowing the lawn.
Yeah. 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 And you
At
and I
what point,
both know how wonderful an unmowed lawn can be once you adjust your expectations.
and at what point do we stop wasting? Like, if this, like, I was thinking about petroleum the other day, and thinking about what a wonderful gift it would have been had it been managed properly, that it could have lasted our civilization thousands of years and
Mm.
been used for such good. Instead, we piss it away to drive to town to buy a cheeseburger or whatever. We piss away this like fantastic energy source just because we built our society up around wasting it.
I have a counterpoint though. I actually think if we'd had like 10,000 years of ultra efficient industrial civilization, it probably would have done more lasting damage to the planet than just ripping it off like a band-aid.
Huh. That's possible. That's possible. But all these farm tasks that we do are so, I mean, I've been farming for 30 years and it's hard on your body.
Yeah.
And when I was young, I wouldn't think anything about picking up a scythe and like doing some mowing with it. But I can't do much of that anymore. And we use a wheel hoe here for cultivating, and I used to be able to do that all day. And now I'd so much rather drive a cultivator than that. But it's almost
I've
uh,
seen I've seen a really interesting graph of the net productivity of peasants across their lifetime. And
uh-huh.
they're a net negative until they hit about 8 years old when they're producing as much food as they're consuming. And then it peaks through like the 30s and 40s. And I think by the time you get to 50, you're back at a net zero. Like you can just about produce enough food to feed yourself. But beyond that point, you're relying on other people to feed you into old age.
I think I'm getting there, but I've been watching these videos of farmers in the developing world. Because I relate to them so much,
Mhm.
particularly farmers in Mexico, because I just love the Mexican culture. I love to go to Mexico whenever I can, and I've had a lot of Mexican friends, and I watched some of these young people. I watched one of an Afghani farmer he was a guy maybe about 30 years old, and his sons harvesting a crop of barley with sickles. And
Yeah.
I've done that before. And in fact, in my younger days, we did a field of barley and wheat by hand just for fun, about an acre. And I was watching him, and with a sickle, you're bent over the whole time. I mean, and I was like, God, that guy, by the time he hits 45, he's going to have some major issues.
Yeah. I my perspective is I try and imagine what the first fish that started moving onto the land, what it was like for them. And there would have been a phase when they weren't fully adapted for being comfortable on land. Like they would have had RSI in their little tiny feet that they were starting to develop, and their lungs would have burnt, and all of these things would have been very difficult when they were only part way through the process of developing a new lifestyle. And I look at how recently agriculture arrived for humanity and how rapidly it spread. I think we're only partway through the process of us adapting and all of the things that we've domesticated. I think we've got further to go. Like I was saying with maize, I think it's the only species we've actually more or less fully domesticated, and other things like wheat. We've got all this technology and culture that kind of compensates for the fact that it's only partially come into relationship with humans.
That's interesting. I wonder, maize was the one that was domesticated the most recently too.
Yes, yeah. And it was a third hybridization. There was original two species hybridization that made teosinte, which was like a minor hard grain that you had to work really hard to grow, and it was only a little tiny pocket of Mexico. And then there was a third species that hybridized into that hybrid and caused the massive transformation in its form and its cultivation.
And it's so central to the culture of all the people that have used it. Like it's a spiritual entity of
Mm,
of it's a god basically. It's the support, and it's so important to the especially the Central American people. Um, I wonder if we talk about coevolution, the maize was certainly had its own part in being honored as practically as a god basically. I mean, the
mm,
Corn Mother or the Mayans, they have the there's a couple different Mayan corn gods. There's Yumkash, and then there's the twins from the, I forget their names, Hunhunapu, and from the Popol. There's a couple different maize gods, but the fact that they were honored with a cult, a religious cult, and rituals and offerings and sacrifices, and even humans were offered to the maize god, especially with among the Aztecs and the Toltecs. Um, it certainly, I wonder if that influenced the development of the plant, as we were talking about the coevolution between plants and humans,
yeah.
almost being the object of religious devotion itself, and such an intense kind of devotion.
Oh,
It's interesting.
I've got two related questions. First, while you touched on the Aztecs, I wondered if you have any perspective on how the culture and spirituality around death and dying could change in the industrial world. Like we've got demographic issues where there's so many old people coming through the system and like an imbalance in the young and the old. We've got medically assisted dying is starting to spread as well too. I wonder, I'm really curious to hear if you have any perspective on like all of that kind of topic.
Uh, I never have really thought about it. It's an interesting question. I did see that in your list of questions about what was it? How did you phrase it in the list of questions? It was
Well, I mean, I kind of compared it to the Black Death, like that kind of suddenly losing half of the population was a key part in triggering the scientific revolution, and now we're kind of moving into like a slow motion Black Death, where it's going to take place over multiple generations, but it's still going to be relatively quick in historic terms.
yeah. As far as I never really I know that the medically assisted dying is an ethical hot button issue, and not really for I mean I feel I mean I don't feel like I think elders are incredibly valuable, and that their contribution to the world as mentors and as sources of wisdom, as particularly as I move, into my middle age, and I feel like and we were talking about, when once you hit 50, you maybe are contributing the amount of calories that you consume, but after that, but elders have a place as people who are witnesses of another world that is
Yeah.
passing away. I mean, I know my kids. I have an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old, and they think I'm hopelessly old-fashioned, and I feel like um, I the value of elders as also a stabilizing influence on a culture is immense,
Mm.
and I think the problem with what we were talking about medically assisted dying is making people feel like they're a burden, or I know older people feel like they can't contribute, or they might feel like they don't have a place, but they absolutely do, and they're so valuable as witnesses of, I mean, of the past, which is going away. There, I mean, when every elder dies, there's precious stories and precious wisdom. I have a neighbor here who passed away a few years ago, and he was a farmer, and he was a dear friend of mine, and he died at about like 86 years old. And I would sit down and talk to him, and he told me he remembered putting up when he was a child in the 19 he was born in the 1930s, and he remembered people putting up hay by hand in haystacks. And he had lived on the same farm his whole life, which is right, right in my neighborhood. Um, and he remembered where the haystacks were, and he said he remembered the stationary threshing machine that they would pull down the road with a steam tractor that they would then use to power the threshing machine. And they would go from farm to farm threshing everybody's wheat. And this is, I don't know if you've ever read George Ewart Evans, the British folklorist. You ever read his stuff?
No, no.
Oh man, you love him. He was an agricultural historian and a folklorist of I believe it's the Suffolk region in England.
Oh no, wait a sec. He does like BBC documentaries.
Well, I don't know. Maybe he does, but he's written a couple books, and I don't have them in the room with me. Ask the Fellows Who Cut the Hay was one. The Farm in the Village is another. And he would just talk to old people. I think he was writing in the I want to say the early part of the 20th century. So, and maybe up into the 50s. So he was interviewing older people that remember the 19th century.
Hmm.
Um, and I guess in that part of the world, in the 19 before the coming of the steam engines, agriculture hadn't changed since the Romans, right? So
Yeah.
he was getting witness of people who remembered like mowing grains with a scythe and a cradle and hand threshing and all this stuff. But my neighbor was kind of like that. And of course Kentucky hasn't been settled as long as that part of the world by Europeans, but my neighbor remembered basically, and Kentucky's always been kind of, I don't want to say backwards, but what's the joke that Mark Twain said about Kentucky is that when the world ends, he wants to be in Kentucky because it's always 5 years behind. Always been sort of a traditional and old-fashioned place, so change came later here. So basically, my neighbor could remember the 19th century mode of production happening in the 1930s, and when he died, he told his son, he told me this story, he told his son and his daughter these stories, and maybe a few other people, but the stories are basically gone. Nobody's written them down.
Yeah.
And on a similar note, I wrote about a fellow gentleman from Mexico that used to work on my farm named Salvador, and I wrote a bunch of his stories in my book. And also, he was also born in the 1930s, and he remembers or remembered. I think he actually has dementia right now, but he's still alive. But and so those memories are gone. But he remembered the first phonograph machine, the first airplane that flew over his village. He remembers the like hunger and the famine that preceded the destruction after the Mexican Revolution. He remembered the first automobile that came into his village. The agriculture that he learned was purely driving oxen and
Hmm.
planting by hand, and swidden by slash and burn. So every time an elderly person passes away, I feel like there's a precious human experience that's gone. So I definitely would feel ambivalent about that. But of course, terminal illness and the pain that goes along with it, to get back to your question, is no freaking joke, and people should not be forced to endure that a moment longer than they have to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely think all elderly people are a living treasure, and so nobody should be encouraged to get out of the way for the new things to come along.
Where do you suspect the ingredients for a post-industrial society are going to come from? Like you've hinted, like Mexico and Central America have retained some of the traditions. Are there pockets in the US as well that have managed to retain some of the things rather than so that we don't have to rediscover and reinvent them, that we can actually tap into the past to pick up the threads?
places in the U.S. that are pretty traditional. I mean, people talk about the Appalachian region and things like that, but I, I think I think in the United States there are a lot of people who are going back to the old ways. I don't know if you follow cattle culture on Substack.
No.
Oh, you need to follow him. Uh, Kevin, I forget his last name. Anyway, you got to follow his Substack, cattle culture. He works land in California with oxen,
Oh,
and so there's some people, and there's a lot of people who use horses. I live not very far from. I don't know if you. I'm sure you know who Wendell Berry is.
oh yes, yeah.
Yeah, I don't live very far from Wendell. He lives just across the Kentucky River from where I live, basically,
Mhm.
and he has a. They have the Berry Center in Newcastle, Kentucky, where they teach people how to farm with horses, how to mow hay with scythes, and all sorts of traditional skills. And so there's a lot of people that are keeping the old knowledge alive. I my personal take it, I'm interested in keeping the medicinal plants going,
Mhm.
you know, and I'm interested in keeping in re-enchanting our spiritual life as well. So I think there's a lot of people working on that project too, trying to I don't know, bring the sacred back into agriculture. And
Well, perfect opportunity to ask you this question. So I keep coming back to the image of the significance of like a Christian communion wafer. So like it's a product that has greater cultural significance than just being a little puck of calories. Like you can't go to Walmart and buy 20 kilos of really cheap communion wafers and get the same thing. It has a place in the culture that gives it significance. And I'm wondering if you can see any opportunities for building spiritual or cultural significance around particularly staple foods, which are often treated as being kind of unglamorous by modern kind of backyard gardening. No, I just had this thing that I keep coming back to that there's some equivalent there that could be made to give people an appreciation for the importance of things like locally grown landrace maize.
okay, that's an interesting question, and it is interesting that you bring up the communion wafer because I don't know if you know, but there's a little prayer that's said under your breath that the priest and the people at the altar party say that is the basically the Jewish Passover prayer that's blessed is the fruit of the vine and blessed is this bread that's fruit of the earth and human hands have made it or something like that. I don't remember how it goes, but it's like a secret prayer that like recognizes that the fact that these things come from the earth and that's what's significant about them.
Yeah,
I'm not really I come from a Christian background, but I'm no longer a practicing Christian, but I do have a lot of respect for the tradition that I come from. And I think in fact when I was a churchgoer and I did raise wheat on my farm, I would try to talk the people at church into making communion bread with the wheat that I raised on the farm, but it wasn't, I guess it was a little too much trouble. Um, anyway, I do know that there are some congregations that do try to make good bread and use good wine for that.
interesting.
Yeah, yeah, there's some people that do that, and I think that they should also use locally made ingredients and locally produced, just my own particular bent on it. But yeah, I definitely think we should bring the sacredness back into our staple crops because they have always been, I mean, they have always been, uh, I mean, the culture of maize and wheat for the traditional cultures that produce them was chock full of ritual. From the moment the seed was planted to the harvesting to the preparing to the eating, every step of the process. And I don't know if you've gotten there in the book, but I do talk about the maize and the green corn ceremony among certain native people and the Lammas ceremony among the Anglo-Saxon people, the Old English people, and the uh, Lunasad, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, among the Celtic people, where the first harvest was surrounded with ritual,
Yeah.
thankfulness, great gratitude to the gods, to the divine, for giving us the food, for giving us the fruit of the earth, and for giving us the fruit of the vine, and all these things. They don't come from us; they come from the gods. They come from God. They come from the divine, and we co-create with nature in their production and in their and every aspect of it is every the success of every aspect of the crop is due to forces beyond our control. I mean, not every aspect. Some of it's, as you know, from being a grower and a farmer, some of it's in your control, but just a lot of it is beyond your control and dealing with larger than human forces, including the plant itself, which will be here, which was here long before you were born, and it'll be here long after you're gone. Um,
I
and
love that.
just ignore.
I love that answer. I love that answer. You've inspired me to keep working on that front in my own community. Now, I have two questions that I ask everyone towards the end of the conversation. The first one is if you can wave a magic wand, maybe you do even have a magic wand, and create a new life form, what would you wish into the world?
A new life form. Wow, that's interesting. Oh, wow. I mean, somebody could probably do that nowadays with genetic engineering and all that stuff.
You could do it with your own garden and a few paintbrushes if you're determined.
That's true. That's true. Um, Gosh, you've got me stumped on that one. Uh,
Well, starting suggestion, you were talking about the Yorpon holly, that it's just a little bit too cold where you are for it to grow reliably.
I would have love to have a. Yeah, you know what? That's a really good idea, Shane. You know, there's a lot of like cold hardy hollies. Yeah,
Yeah,
there you go.
yep.
A hardy caffeine containing holly. That'd be a great one.
I think there's a few other people working on that front. So forming a little
Oh,
network and sharing seeds when you make a little bit of progress is how to turbocharge those projects.
yeah, I contacted a guy in North Carolina about getting some plants, open plants from him because he's that's the supposedly the same climatic zone that I'm in, but he said he didn't have any for sale.
Uh, Keep persisting. You'll get there. And that's
Yeah,
always I find the trick is once you've got two or three different, even different strains of the same named species, once they mix with each other and reproduce, some kind of weird magic happens. They transform in a way that allows them to tap into the local environment and grow in a completely different way.
you know how people are producing perennial wheat that are working on producing perennial wheat like Wes Jackson at the Land Institute. I don't know where he's gotten with that, but he's interested in producing perennial grain crops so you're not turning the soil every year.
Mm.
That's
Yeah,
another good one.
there's so many possibilities on this front. I mean, it's what keeps me going doing this podcast is to get people's eyes opened and give them permission. Like, go out there, make a new life form. It's been done by people with far less resources and education than you throughout history.
Somebody just made a tobacco with that makes psilocybin and DMT, and that one sounds like a pretty good one to have.
Look out for that one. Now, the other sister question to this is if you could create a new cultural technology, an institution or a tradition or an art form, what would you gift to society?
Well, see, this is more like where I'm at. I really would like to see a land honoring agricultural. I recently wrote something a counter agriculture, like a land honoring spiritual. Like look, we have the organic movement, we have the regenerative agriculture movement, and there's certain sections of that that are also tuned into the spiritual side of it. Maybe the biodynamic people are. Um, Definitely have an appreciation for the spiritual side of it, but just maybe acknowledging a culture that acknowledges the that Mother Earth is sacred and that and then honors that in community celebrations like I was just mentioning the harvest celebrations or something like that. And on a small level, I'd like to do that here. Our farm is really small. We can't have too many people, but I would really like to start having a party to harvest corn,
Yeah.
our maize
Yeah.
corn. to shell it and to process it, like the people used to do for Lammas or Lunast or the Green Corn Moon or something like that, to get people together and to harvest a crop from the earth and give thanks for it. And I think, and to get people together for the planting and to build an a counter culture around agriculture, I think would be really that's consciously um, honors Mother Earth as a divine being,
Mm.
and not just you know that. But that's the pagan in me. I want to see people honoring nature as divine and bringing the divine back to nature and incorporating that into our agriculture again. Um,
Can I
yeah,
suggest an addition to the ritual?
sure.
That you have a bonfire and you take industrial corn products like Doritos and Cheetos and all those kind of things, and you throw them in the fire together.
That'd be great. Yeah, the bonfire's got to be a part of it. Nothing draws people together like a bonfire.
Yeah.
But you can make like a wicker man and stuff it full of Doritos.
Yes, yes. That make him really fat.
Yes, really fat, like a scarecrow, and just stuff him full of Doritos.
You gotta have fun with these things. Okay, so now where can people learn more about your work?
Well, we're working on, as we speak, my wife and a friend of ours are working on our website, and I think it's going to go live either tonight or tomorrow, and that is thecunningfarmer.com.
Mhm.
And it might be a little basic right off the bat, but we're going to add stuff to it. I think it's going to have links where people can buy the book and find out about some skincare and body products my wife makes. They can get in touch with me for astrological readings or remote Reiki healings. And some of the other stuff that I make, like I do raise filberts and hazels for mostly I raise them for making magic wands and staffs and divination um, sets with. So they're going to be able to get stuff like that I make, that my wife makes. And then my Substack, which is thecunningsfarmer.substack.com, and you can come on and be a free subscriber and read almost everything that I've written. You can be a paid subscriber and read the archives as well. And then you can get my book from Inner Traditions International, my publisher, or from Amazon, or from Barnes and Noble, or even better yet, your local bookstore. Because I really like to encourage local independent bookstores to order a copy of my book. I believe it's available in Australia. It's available in Europe, in the UK, and it's also available in North America. And I don't know where else it's available. I'd love to see a
Wonderful.
Spanish
I
as
highly
well.
recommend the book. I rarely I read books, but I don't keep them. This is one that I will keep because it's like I can't think of another foundational book that's put together so many elements of this part of history and with a great story and a personal perspective on it on top.
Yeah, thank you, Shane. And I'm working on another one that's going to be called On the Rustic Gods, I think is my working title, and it's going to be about agrarian paganism. So like more of like a focus on the divinities and the rights of of agrarian of what an agrarian pagan culture might look like.
Wonderful. I look forward to that. Well, Todd, thank you very much for what has been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you very much, Shane, for having me on. It's been really fun talking to you.
If you'd like to support the show, sign up to my Substack for free weekly posts, and a paid subscription will unlock the archive of past posts and support me doing this podcast otherwise for free. Next week, I'll be talking to Nathan Surendran from New Zealand about the impact of peak oil on his local community and his efforts to counter it.